Hello everyone, this is Mr. Harper. Earlier in this new unit, Specialized Tissues and Plants, you heard from Mrs. Mast, and she taught you about organs. Now we have organs in our bodies, like our liver and our heart and our stomach. Plants have organs too. I want to review that really quick before we dive into the next part of it, which is tissues in plants. So in plants, the three principal organs are roots, stems, leaves. Now what is an organ? An organ is simply a group of tissues all working together to do something. So to give you an example, in the human body, we have an organ like our stomach. And our stomach is made of many different kinds of tissues. It's not a tissue like you would blow your nose in, but a tissue, a group of cells working together to do something. But it's that stomach is made of a bunch of different tissues working together to perform a task. So that's what she talked about, and she told you about the three primary organs. Roots, they hold the plant in the ground, they absorb water and nutrients, and they help to move those things through the plant. And stems that hold the plant upright and are a transportation system for the water and the nutrients and minerals to get around through the plant. And she also talked to you about the leaves. The leaves are the primary photosynthetic organ that takes in sunlight and then does photosynthesis with it to make food for the plant. So that's where we've been. I want to talk to you about this, tissues. Now, an organ is a group of tissues working together to do something. So a leaf, that organ. Now, what's a tissue? A tissue is a group of cells working together to do something. Groups of tissues all together become an organ, just like I told you that a whole bunch of different kinds of tissues, groups of cells working together to do something, become an organ like your heart in your body. Well, likewise, there are three different kinds of tissues, these groups of cells working together to do something, that become, or make up, I should say, the organs of the plant, like a leaf or a root or a stem. So, these tissues, there are three main kinds of tissues in seed plants, which in other words are plants that have, guess what, seeds. The first is called a dermal tissue, and it's the protective outer covering of a plant. The second is called vascular tissue. It helps to support the plant, but mostly the big thing it does, well, I shouldn't say mostly, but one of the big things it does is to transport or move water and nutrients and minerals around the plant. The third kind of tissue is called ground tissue, and it produces and stores sugar and also helps to physically support the plant. So those are three kinds of tissues. Let's explore this a little bit more. So all three of the organs, roots, stems, and leaves, have all three of the tissues in them. So if I look here at a leaf and I cut this leaf in half, and I'm looking at it after I've cut it in half. Sorry about that. Spam call. So look, there's dermal tissue. This dermal tissue is this brown color. It covers this leaf. Likewise, there's dermal tissue in the stem. We cut it in half and looking at it. There it is, covering. And we take a piece of root and cut it in half. There's dermal tissue there too, covering, because that's the job of dermal tissue, to cover and protect the plant. There's also vascular tissue, which is red and yellow, and you can see this big ring of red and then little bits of yellow in circles here. Likewise, you can see it kind of looks like a piece of candy corn from Halloween. Red and yellow dermal tissue, or excuse me, vascular tissue in the stem, and red and yellow vascular tissue in the root. And finally, ground tissue. That's this grayish color stuff in here. It's in the leaf, it's in the stem, and it's in the root. So all three of the organs, leaves, stems, roots, have all three of the tissues, dermal, vascular, and ground. So let's talk about the dermal tissue for a moment. It's the protective outer covering of a plant. And in the very outside of dermal tissue is a single layer of cells called the epidermis. We have the same thing on our bodies, this dermal tissue and epidermis. We call it our skin. So plants have it too. It just looks different. Serves some of the same functions though. Protection is the big function. Some dermal tissue, like on this tree, this bark is very, very thick, but irregularly, but thick. Some plants have a very waxy, thick dermal tissue, the epidermis, like this jade plant, and it has a covering on that epidermis called a cuticle. It's waxy and protects the plant from losing water. Okay, so there's different kinds here of this dermal tissue. Some dermal tissue has these little fuzzy projections on it. Here it is on a leaf, and here it is on a root. They're called trichomes. They do two things. They protect the leaf, especially in a leaf, protect it from being eaten, because if you were eating a leaf, would you want to eat one that is fuzzy? No, I wouldn't. That would feel very weird in your mouth. So these fuzzy trichomes help to protect the leaf. And in roots, these fuzzy trichomes, which are all part of the dermal tissue, help the root to absorb water. Here's a really baby plant. Here's the very first stem and leaves coming out right there. It hasn't even fully sprouted yet. And this was the seed, part of the seed here that you can barely see. So that's dermal tissue. Vascular tissue. Vascular tissue does two things. It gives the plant support, especially in the stem, and transports or moves water and nutrients through the plant. There are two kinds of vascular tissue. Xylem, which carries water, and phloem, which carries dissolved food, dissolved nutrients. They are tubes. They're made of long cells that are very slender, and they're tubes. So you have these tubes that move water and tubes that move food. They are made by this ring of tissue right here called the vascular cambium. On the outside of the vascular cambium, the phloem is made, and on the inside of the vascular cambium, the xylem is made. So these are all xylem cells on the inside of this vascular cambium, and phloem on the outside. Phloem is much thinner than the xylem, and phloem is alive, and so is the xylem. It moves food and water. We'll talk more about those in later units. Ground tissue, third kind of tissue. Ground tissue makes sugar and stores it, contributes to helping support the plant. It's not dermal, it's not vascular, it's ground. And there are three kinds of tissues that are called ground tissues. And we're not going to dwell on these a whole lot, but I want you at least to be aware of them. There is ground tissue called parenchyma. They have thin cell walls. And then there's ground tissue called collenchyma. They have thicker cell walls. And finally, the last one is called sclerenchyma, and it has the thickest cell walls. They're all three kinds of cells that form ground tissue. Remember, a tissue is a group of cells working together to perform a job. So, for example, the sclerenchyma, a whole bunch of those cells working together to do something become a tissue. And one place that you'll find these, because their cell walls are so thick, they're very, very tough. On the outside covering of, say, an acorn, a nut, makes that nut very hard because of those thick cell walls. And we'll stop there. So remember, organs, there are three kinds of organs in a plant. There are leaves, there are stems, there are roots. Organs are made of groups of tissues working together to do something. And there's three kinds of tissue: ground, vascular, and dermal. And those tissues are what help the plant to do the things it needs to do. We'll talk more next time.